we have all of our jurors now back in the courtroom, and we have Mr. Durst and the lawyers for both sides are present. I wanted to let you know we followed up on that incident and I know you're very sensitive about it after reading about yourself, I guess, in the newspaper. So I know you're particularly sensitive about it because of what you described earlier. So we identified the person involved, and that person told our public information officer, please let everyone know I would never, ever, ever take a photograph in the courthouse. I was emailing the network and inadvertently had my phone up while typing. I would be devastated after 42 years if someone thought I would violate court rules. Let me know how to clear this up. I'm sick to my stomach. So the person genuinely wants you to know that she feels sorry, and I know you perceive that it seemed she was taking a photograph. She says she wasn't, but just in case, we've made an order to all media about giving jurors space. Don't even give any juror don't even make it look like it's possible you're taking photos. And of course they were texting the update. So that they apologize. They don't. Oh, right. No. That's what they have said. And as somebody whose career is involved in doing this business, I think they're going to be pretty careful at this point because we've advised them not to do anything like that. And with that, I want you to know that I do take this so seriously. We did identify the person, we talked with the person, and we will do everything we can to protect your privacy and your personal integrity. So now with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Lewin, who will give the balance of his opening statement.
So I kind of learned today over lunch. I came back and I brushed my teeth and I put my mask on, and you realize, oh my gosh, you got to really be careful what you eat for lunch because it is staying with you. So I had like peppers and my eyes are like watering. So I'm not having a stroke up here if it looks like that's what's going on. A couple of things that I just wanted to clear up from the beginning. One thing before I forget, you are going to see, particularly our team, and maybe the defense team as well, because we all have to communicate, we are doing it by texting and Zoom. So when you see us texting, we're not on dating apps. We're not checking the stocks. I'm not. Maybe Tim, he's married to. Actually, none of us should be on dating apps. So probably not the defense team either. We're communicating with each other because that's what we have to do. The internet in here goes off and on. So I wanted to make sure you knew that's what we were doing. The second thing is obviously every once in a while when you're up here and you're speaking, you're going to misspeak. And something I said, I just want to correct myself. I realized right after I said it, I told you that I needed to prove that Bob Durst intentionally killed Kathie Durst. I don't have to prove that at all. What I have to prove for the witness killing special circumstance is that Susan Berman was a witness to some kind of criminal conduct and that Bob Durst killed Susan because of that. So in other words, even if it was less than a homicide and simply Bob Durst committed an action and got rid of the body, that would be enough, if you believe that evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, to prove the special circumstance. I apologize that I misspoke on that. So continuing, we were talking about who was Kathie Durst. So in the fall of 1971, when Bob Durst was 29, he met 19-year-old Kathie McCormack. And shortly thereafter, they got married. Kathie, at the time, there was a significant age. I'm sorry? Oh, we lost the TV over here? Wow, DirecTV will only come to give us an 8-hour You got it?
Power button. Was it plugged in?
That's good. So as I was saying, there was a, hopefully that 30 seconds doesn't count against me.
Stop the clock.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ron. The significant age difference, it's not just that you had a 10-year age difference. It's that Kathie was very young, only 19 at the time. So they met when she was in essence a kid. And very shortly thereafter, they ended up getting married. As we said before, Kathie was from a very close family. They had never seen, they were from Long Island, middle class at best. And Bob Durst was living a life and was the kind of person, it was a world away. Once married, the Dursts split their time between a penthouse on 37 Riverside Drive on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and eventually they had an apartment on the Upper East Side at 12 East 86th Street. This would become important because this was the location where Kathie would end up primarily living at the time that she disappeared. And the reason she was living there is that she was going to school at Einstein in the Bronx, and so this apartment was much closer than on the Upper West Side where the apartment was in Manhattan. They also had a weekend lakeside cottage an hour away in South Salem, which is in Westchester County, and that's where the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst killed Kathie. She never made it back to Manhattan. She died at that house on January 31st, 1982. So from the start of their relationship, Bob Durst was admittedly controlling. And this is not my perception or my description. This, again, comes directly from Bob Durst himself.
Well, I was always very controlling.
Now, Bob Durst also sought to control Kathie with his money. And he was very clear about that.
I would give Kathie a small budget. This is what you got for the week or month or whatever it is. If you want to spend more, don't talk to me about it.
But did she have any other source of income?
No,
So whatever she gave her that was the
that
limit.
was it. Like we're getting an abortion, we're getting an abortion. This is how much money you got to spend this week or month, period.
So 19-year-old Kathie Durst became Kathie Durst, the college student, and eventually Kathie Durst, the nurse, and eventually Kathie Durst, the medical student. So Kathie Durst in 1982 was no longer that 19-year-old kid. She was a couple of months from becoming a doctor. And Kathie was no kind of shy, quiet, passive person. And Kathie became more independent. And admittedly, and this is a theme with Bob Durst, he began to lose control. And Robert Durst, he wants control. Now, eventually, Durst responded to Kathie's growing independence. And it went from emotional issues, emotional abuse. It went from controlling financially. It went from telling Kathie that she was going to get an abortion or that was it, the marriage was over. It escalated into actually physical violence. And it's important for you to understand, as you're looking at this case, Bob Durst sits here, and he is a frail old man. There's no question. He probably weighs 110 pounds. And the image that you have of him is this man sitting here today. But that's not who Robert Durst was in 1982. It's not who he was in 2000. And that's really important that as you examine the evidence, that you do so not through the lens that you're looking at now, not through this old man who, when you look at him, looks extremely frail. You look at it through who he was when this was happening.
By 1981, our life was half arguments, fighting, slapping, pushing, wrestling.
So this is, again, behavior that Mr. Durst freely admits, even to the point of there was a scene in All Good Things. It's very jarring. It's very disturbing. And Robert Durst is watching the DVD commentary. He's sitting with Andrew Jarecki, and they're showing him the movie. And he's watching Ryan Gosling portraying him on the screen with Kirsten Dunst portraying Kathie Durst. And you're going to see just a horrific episode of domestic violence, and you're going to see Bob Durst's response to it.
I knew that she was doing bad in school and gotten a whole bunch of incompletes, and I was under the impression that she wasn't sure she was going to graduate. This is close. After a number of years, before I would go to her family's house for a function, I would insist that we agree on how long we're going to stay. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. We would always do a negotiation. When the time was up, I was ready to leave. Seen the story about the hair 2 different ways. One way, I drag her out of the house by her hair. The other way, I grab her hair and a big chunk comes out. Either one is close enough.
Now, the evidence is going to show that when Mr. Durst is watching this, he doesn't respond by saying, "Oh my God, that's not how it happened. I didn't do that. It wasn't that violent. I would never mistreat my wife like that." He literally looks at the screen, says this is close, and then explains casually that he can't remember whether he pulled a clump of his wife's hair out of her head. But if he didn't, it was close enough. Those aren't my words. Those are his words. And then he's going to go on, and this is the next thing he's going to say about it.
And the hair pulling wasn't even the worst. There were numerous, I don't know, numerous, a whole bunch of other times I would grab her and say, "We're leaving."
So this was the life that Kathie Durst was leading. And it was difficult. You have a young woman who, during the day, looks like this successful young medical student. And in actuality, she's a victim of domestic violence. She's being physically abused by her husband. And it certainly led, the evidence will show, to problems with her at school. How couldn't it? That's the person she was married to. That's her husband. So, by 1981, Kathie was preparing for a divorce. And what's important to remember is there is evidence that Kathie wanted the divorce and Bob didn't. There was some potential evidence that Bob wanted the divorce and Kathie didn't. What is not going to be in any way questioned by you is that what is clear is that Bob and Kathie wanted different things. And Bob Durst, I'm in charge. You'll do what I say. You'll go when I say you'll go. You'll get the amount of money I say you'll get. And that's what happened. Now, things escalated pretty bad. In the fall of 1981, after Durst had beaten Kathie, stated that he wanted to kill her, she climbed out the window of her penthouse in the rain and sought refuge with her neighbor, Ann Anderson Doyle. I'm going to go into a little more detail about Ann Anderson Doyle's specific statement. Kathie also told Ann that Bob Durst had a gun. Now, this is in the fall. And if you have a timeline, and as you're sitting there as jurors, you have, in some ways, an eerie kind of advantage because you know how the story ends. You see the escalating abuse, and you see the escalating violence. And you know that we're now in the fall of 1981. Kathie has months to live. That's it. Now, by 1982, Bob Durst was living in the Riverside Drive penthouse on the west side, while Kathie was living at East 86th Street because she needed to be closer to the hospitals where she was doing her rotations. On January 6, 1982, this is less than a month before she would disappear, Kathie was demeaned enough where she had to go to the emergency room at the same medical school where she was training to become a doctor. Humiliating, degrading. She had an injury to her face. You're going to hear from Dr. Sophie Bach. You're going to hear from her very likely as early as tomorrow. And she's going to testify about what she wrote, about the injury Kathie had. Now, despite the growing tension in the marriage, and this is important, some of you will likely be saying to yourself, well, why didn't Kathie just leave? Why would she stay with somebody who was abusing her? And by the way, in many situations, you kind of had a he said, she said. She says that there's violence, and he says there isn't. There's no he said, she said here. Bob Durst is telling you in living color how violent he was with her, and yet she stayed. And I want to make sure that as you look at this evidence that you all understand that even though Kathie Durst obviously made a tremendous mistake staying with her husband and seeing him after this violence, that happens every day in this country. It's happened for generations. It'll happen for generations more. So Kathie continued to spend time with him. No one is saying that Bob Durst kidnapped her and took her up to South Salem. She went voluntarily. Was she trying to save her marriage? Was she trying to make sure that she didn't leave that marriage empty-handed? Put 9 years into that? We'll never know. But what we do know is that on Sunday, January 31st, 1982, they were together at their lakeside cottage in South Salem, New York. Now, South Salem, New York is very close to the border of Connecticut, approximately 45 minutes, hour drive. And it's also in the middle of winter, and it's cold up there. And we know that on that Sunday, Kathie ends up driving over the border to her friend Gilberta Najami's house. Gilberta is deceased. You will not be hearing her testimony in this case. Kathie drove over to Gilberta's house. And we know that while Kathie was there, that she had a very disturbing conversation with the photographer who Bob Durst had beaten. And she was very upset with Peter Schwartz that he was not going to pursue his claim. She thought that was going to help her with the divorce. And she leaves, and she comes home, and she's riled up. And she returns to the South Salem cottage that evening. And we know that they argued. This wasn't just a verbal argument. We know that they had a violent physical argument. Now, how do we know that? Because Bob Durst has admitted it was violent that night.
That was an argument.
Was that argument just a verbal argument?
No, that was a pushing, shoving argument.
Now, what is interesting, and this was in the original opening, is that when this interview was done, there were interviews 3 days in a row, December 11th, 12th, and 13th of 2010 with Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling. And Bob Durst wore the same clothes. They did that so they could move things around. We know, I showed you in the original opening statement, you'll see it again during the trial, that literally either the next day or the day after, Bob Durst denied that it was ever a physical fight that night. And when he was confronted, he said, I don't think I said that. Because one of the hallmarks of Bob Durst is that despite all the lies that he tells, he doesn't take or use the mental energy to even remember them, because his life has been spent privileged and getting away with whatever he wants without any effort. So he doesn't even really try to keep track of his lies. And by the way, the evidence will show that's going to be his undoing in a lot of ways in all three of these cases. So the next day is Monday, February 1st. Kathie was to begin her first day of ambulatory at the pediatric clinic at Bronx Memorial Hospital. At the time, she was going to be working for a physician in a clinic. So she's not going to be on call. It's not going to be at night. She's going to be in a pediatric clinic. And this is going to be important. She's going to want to do her best work in this clinic because Kathie is looking at becoming a pediatrician. And she wants to work locally. So she could end up applying for a residency at that program. So she's got every incentive to really be on top of her game. Well, what happens? Kathie never makes it to the clinic. And she has never been seen since. Bob Durst waited 4 days before reporting her missing. And he made a lot of statements as to why he waited that amount of time. Most of what he initially told the police, he has since admitted, were lies. Again, not the people's version, well, he's not being truthful. He himself has admitted they were lies.
I don't know that I ever filled in all the little pieces of all that, but I just wanted to get it done with it. I'm going to report it, and that'll be that. I did not go through my mind that police ask oodles of questions and go here and there and everywhere. Just wasn't used to that. I was not used to somebody questioning my motive, questioning my veracity.
Now that is an extremely important clip of Bob Durst because that explains to you, oh, that's why he makes these admissions. That's why he makes these mistakes. Because as he says, he figured, I will just tell the police whatever I tell them. He has another quote where he says, it's like a negotiation. I figured I tell them this and that's it. No one questions me on negotiations. It's just what I do. Well, it's not what happens. And although, unfortunately, the New York Police Department did a extremely subpar investigation, there was certainly information even at the time. The evidence will show that there was information at the time that Bob Durst was involved in his wife's disappearance. Now, after Kathie's disappearance, Durst enlists the help of his most trusted friend, Susan Berman, and he wants her to act as his spokesman. And there are a lot of things released to the media. You're going to hear testimony from Marcia Cranes, Charles Latchman, who worked for the New York Post. Susan Berman was out there hustling and telling stories to help Bob Durst. So this is a summary of the original version of events that Bob Durst gave to Detective Strzok in 1982. Now, you're not going to hear from Detective Strzok in person. You're going to hear from It's going to be videotaped. In fact, you're going to hear from many witnesses in this case. There have been agreements, a stipulation, that rather than those witnesses coming to court again, that we can use their videotape testimony, which you are to treat as if they had testified in court. You will notice that it's been edited because we have to take out things like objections or things that should not be there. So you're going to see that. One of the individuals, and I think it's approximately 8 hours long of testimony of Detective Strzok. So what was Bob Durst's original version? On January 31st, 1982, Durst and Kathie were together in South Salem. They had a pushing and shoving argument. He put her on a train back to the city. He then visited the mayors. Remember, he says he visited Bill Mayer. He spoke with Kathie by phone that night. She was at Riverside Drive watching the news. Her disappearance was her own fault. Bob Durst talked about the fact that Kathie dressed provocatively. She showed off her money. She was flashy. The evidence is going to show that Kathie was basically a hippie, and she was a young medical student. And she was never heard from again. Now, when we eliminate the statements that just come from Bob Durst and Susan Berman, and in addition, those statements that have been discredited, what remains of what he originally said? That, ladies and gentlemen, is what the evidence is going to show happened. And that Kathie never left Westchester. She never left that house in South Salem. He killed her there, and then he got rid of her body. Now, on Monday morning, Kathie purportedly called Dr. Cooperman, who was an associate dean, between 9 and 11, and informed him that she had diarrhea and would not be making it to school that day. Now, remember, Kathie's not going to school at that point. She's in rotations. So the evidence is going to show that that rotation that you are reporting to, she's almost a doctor. They are expecting you to be there. You have responsibilities. You're going to call the attending or another resident in that service. You're going to tell them, I'm not going to be here. And the evidence is going to show you're not going to do it at 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning, 11 in the morning when you're due at 9. And in addition, you have heard evidence and you're going to hear evidence in this case that coming up and being a young female physician in the early 80s, women had to be twice as good, work twice as hard. No woman was going to call up and say that they could not come in and talk about their female problems to a dean of a medical school. But the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst had no choice because he didn't know where Kathie was. In fact, he told Detective Strzok that she was staying overnight at the hospital. So he had to call Dean Cooper. He had to call the medical school because he didn't know what rotation to call. That's what the evidence will show. We talked about Dr. Sophie Bach, who ran the clinic. Kathie never showed up. I actually, I think I referred to
Dr. Leslie Hain.
Yeah. The doctor, thank you, Mr. Bailey. The doctor who treated her was Dr. Leslie Hain, now Dr. Leslie Letterman, at the hospital in January. Not Dr. Sophie Bach. Dr. Sophie Bach, who you will hear from, you're going to hear from both of them very soon. Dr. Bach's going to testify tomorrow, and she was the attending that ran that pediatric clinic. She's going to tell you that in her 40 years now training medical students, this is the only time that she can remember that a medical student has not shown up and not called. 40 years, never happened, only this time. Now, during the original investigation, and this is just poor investigation, that's what the evidence will demonstrate, Dr. Cooperman assumed that it was Kathie he had spoken to on the phone because the person identified themselves as Kathie. No questions were asked of him at the time. Did you recognize the voice? Did they give you any specific information that you knew was Kathie? Nothing. That's what he assumed. Now, the evidence will show that that was an incorrect assumption and that it was never properly followed up on. Now, Kathie's medical school classmates, and I'm going to call a lot of them, and they're going to testify that there is no way that she would not have called the rotation to let them know she would not be there. They're going to laugh. They're going to tell you it's not even, it's so ridiculous that it's actually funny. They're going to tell you that that idea would be that she would not call to say she wasn't going to be there, and that she would tell a male dean she was having cramps. Now, if Kathie didn't make the phone call to Dean Cooperman, who did? Well, we know who did. Because shortly after the call to Dean Cooperman was made, and multiple times over the years, Susan admitted to making that call or providing an alibi, and she did this to a number of her friends. Now, she didn't tell every friend the same thing, because depending on what they would think of her, how close they were, she modified it. But in the end, what she was clear about was that she made up an alibi to help Bob Durst, and she told several people, and you'll hear from them, that she actually called Dean Cooperman pretending to be Kathie. And these people, when they come in, you're going to hear, they don't have any motive. They don't want to be here. They don't want to inject themselves into this case. But they're going to tell you that that's what Susan told them. Now, Susan also told Nick Chabon, she and Durst, very mutual close friend, the truth of what actually happened to Kathie.
Susan said to me specifically that Bob killed Kathie, and I said no, he didn't, and she said yes, he did, and we argued about that, and she said, we love both of them, Kathie's gone, we love Bob, we need to protect him. Bob killed Kathie. I said, how do you know? She said, he told me.
Kathie's gone. We can't help her. We need to protect Bob.
Louder.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kathie's gone, we can't help her, we need to protect Bob.
In the week after Kathie disappeared, her sister and brother-in-law, Mary and Tom Hughes, searched the Durst South Salem cottage, and they found the following in the trash: town dump, bridge, dig, boat, other, shovel, or check, car trunk, rent. Now, the evidence is going to show that this is a list of how to get rid of a body. Well, if only we could find out who wrote it. Well, Mr. Durst has already stipulated it's not a fact for you to determine. So in other words, you can't go back there and say, well, how do we know Bob wrote it? That's done. Bob Durst has admitted that's his writing. Now, on February 8th, a week after Kathie disappeared, Karen Minatello, who was the manager at East 86th Street, discovers all of Kathie's belongings in the trash. So, allegedly, Kathie disappears, and Mr. Durst finds out about it on February 4th. There are different stages that people go through, you know, denial, questioning, anger, etc., acceptance. Mr. Durst went straight from Kathie's disappeared to, well, I guess she's dead and not coming back. He throws away all her stuff, so much so that he jammed up the trash. Her medical books are in there. She's still in school. She's still studying. She's going to have boards eventually to take, and it's all gone. Now, that's not the only place Bob just $25,000. And the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst, a strong point of his is not empathy and is not concern about other people. He's an extremely self-involved person. I'm not saying that as a judgment. I'm saying that Bob Durst is not the kind of person who's going to be sending $25,000 to help a friend when he thinks he's about to be charged with his wife's disappearance and death, and when he's extremely cheap. So on November 11, 2000, the New York media began reporting the reinvestigation of Kathie's disappearance. On November 15th, Durst rents this tiny apartment in this Galveston boarding house for $300 a month. In Galveston, he kept his identity secret. He did not want the name Robert Durst associated with who he was.
I didn't tell anybody my name was Robert Durst. I didn't use my checks, my credit cards, my telephone, any of them.
Now, in an attempt to hide his identity even further, Durst disguised himself as a mute woman and used the name Dorothy Siner, a girl he'd gone to high school with. Now, meanwhile, as part of the reopening into Kathie's disappearance, New York police investigators, you're going to hear from Joe Becerra, wanted to speak to Susan Berman. It is extremely important to understand they never made contact with Susan prior to her murder. So they actually never talked to her. But that's not what Susan told Bob Durst. Susan lied to Bob Durst. She told him she had been contacted by investigators, and they wanted to speak to her about Kathie. That is the move that cost her her life. That is what sealed her fate. That is what got her the bullet in the back of her head. Because at that point in time, Bob Durst was being squeezed and pressured. And although there's no evidence whatsoever that he knew that Susan had already told a number of people, in fact, the evidence would suggest that he didn't know that. What he did know was that Susan was not somebody, despite her loyalty, who he apparently believed would be able to keep her mouth shut to the police. It is not just me standing up here telling you this is what Bob Durst thought. So it's not coming from me that Susan Berman told him that she'd been contacted by investigators when it wasn't true. Bob Durst has confirmed that on more than one occasion. He confirmed it during the interview in New Orleans on March 15, 2015.
Susan told me that she'd been contacted by Los Angeles detectives and New York detectives, and they want to come talk to me.
Now, Durst further explained that he and Susan had agreed that she should just go ahead and talk to the police. At the end of this clip, you're going to hear Bob Durst say something. It's a little bit hard to hear. He's going to say the last thing is in essence, well, what am I going to do?
And did you have any feeling about what she was doing in talking to the police? Did you feel like she was...
She said, Bobby, it's going to be best for both of us. And I just talked to them. All right, what am I going to say? No.
What am I going to say? No, talk to them. So Bob Durst now knows that Susan Berman is going to be talking to investigators. He cannot let that happen. So on December 22nd, sometime...
24th.
No, on December 22nd, sometime late in the evening...
That sounds like an argument. So please do not draw inferences from the facts. Instead, display the facts. You may do it in a persuasive way as you do, but do not make an argument about the facts. You may continue.
The evidence is going to show that on December 22nd, that evening, or on the morning early on the 23rd, that Bob Durst drove down in his Ford Explorer to Susan's place. He made entry into the house, and that's when he killed her. He then sent the note because he wanted her body found, because he cared about her. He didn't want to kill her. He cared. And she was Jewish, and he knew that Jews need to be buried very quickly after their death. So he sent the note. On December 24th, her body was found by police inside of her Benedict Canyon residence. Meanwhile, back in Galveston, in April of 2000, about 8 months later, 71-year-old Morris Black, who was an old drifter, had moved into the tiny apartment across the hall from Bob Durst. Shortly after he and Morris met, Bob Durst stopped pretending to be a mute woman. During the summer of 2001, Morris became aware of Bob Durst's true identity. So remember, this is now after Susan's death in December. Bob goes back to Galveston, and Morris Black had become aware of his true identity in the summer of 2001. He also learned that Bob Durst had significant financial resources. Now, Morris received an eviction notice from the landlord, Klaus Dillman, who's now deceased. There'll be a stipulation about his testimony, on July 15, 2001. And he was pressuring Bob Durst to buy a house that they could live in together. But the evidence is going to show Bob Durst did not want to be on the hook to Morris Black any more than he was on the hook to Susan Berman. On July 25, 2001, 2020 aired a nationwide episode on Kathie's disappearance. The circumstantial evidence will demonstrate that Morris Black very likely saw that episode. During this period of time, Durst was continuing to structure money, a habit that he had picked up previously, and it was what he did when he was preparing to run. It meant, you're going to hear testimony, that in essence, he would take amounts of money, just less than $10,000, he would pull it out in preparation to flee. On September 25, 2001, Durst began moving out of the apartment and checked into the nearby San Luis resort. Now, Durst claims that at around 6 a.m. on September 28, 2001, after a short jog, he arrived at his Galveston apartment. Remember, he says that he parked the car at the Temple, and then he jogs over there at 6 in the morning in his jogging shorts. And he says that he allegedly entered the apartment and he found Morris uninvited inside. Now, the following is Durst's version of what happened.
He was in the apartment. I could hear the TV from outside. Opened up the door, ready to start. Oh, and also, since I'd taken the key away, he must have made an extra key. And that went through my mind right away. He's in the apartment. He made an extra key. Walk into the apartment. He's sitting at the table. There's a yellow thing on a sweater or whatever, jacket, on top of the table. And I'm, primed. Morris, get out of here, period. I'm leaving, get out. I don't ever want to see you again. He takes the gun out from under whatever the yellow thing is on the table. I grab him and the gun, and we fall down in the kitchen. The gun goes off and shoots him in the side of the face.
Now, in describing it again, Mr. Durst makes it sound as if the gun had a mind of its own and it shot Morris Black. The evidence is going to show that this is not how the killing happened, that this was a premeditated murder of Morris Black. 2 days later, on September 30th, 2001, a boy fishing with his dad found Morris's body parts floating in Galveston Bay. During his 2015 interview in the New Orleans jail, Bob Durst was asked about the manner in which he had dismembered Morris's body. Listen to the tone as he describes, literally, dismembering his friend.
I've been told that a surgeon would cut up a body the same way you do a chicken. You go into the joint and you cut around the joint to get rid of all the ligaments, and then the thing comes out. You're not going to go and try to cut through the goddamn bone like I did, which was hard.
At his trial in Galveston in 2003, Durst described under oath the plan that he formulated after Morris's death. His plan was, I would make it appear that Morris Black moved out of 2213 Avenue K. He wanted to make his body disappear, and he wanted to make it look like Morris had just walked away from his old life. The evidence will show that that's the same thing he did to Kathie Durst 20 years earlier. On October 9, 2001, Durst was arrested going back to pick up a cheap pair of eyeglasses That's how cheap Bob Durst was. He had a prescription there, and he was going to get his eyeglasses. And he was charged with Morris Black's murder, but they didn't understand who Bob Durst was and knew his name. They didn't know who he was. And he immediately posted $300,000 bail, and he was released. On November 30th, 2001, after 45 days on the run, he was arrested at a Pennsylvania supermarket for shoplifting a chicken sandwich, a newspaper, and a Band-Aid. At the time, Durst had about $500 in his pocket, $37,000 inside his rental car in the parking lot. Inside the car, police also found 2 loaded handguns, additional ammunition, marijuana, and Morris Black's driver's license. And if you remember from the original opening, he had told the security guard and the police officer that he had his money in the glove box. There was no money in the glove box, there was just a gun. Now, Durst also had something else. He had Gilberta Najami's address and the name of the place she worked, the phone numbers, a map of where she lived, as well as the following in the notebook. What DD, which the evidence will show is Douglas Durst, is doing to me puts me in the same place as what Kathie did to me. Now, this is 20 years roughly after he's killed Kathie. A couple of weeks later, when he's arrested and is awaiting extradition, Durst expands on his plans for his brother Douglas in a conversation with his wife.
And you know what I told you the other day about when we were talking, what I said I thought you were going to do? Remember?
No.
We were talking, you were telling me about what your life has been like and what you were thinking.
Yeah, my plan, yeah.
Okay?
Definitely not going to say.
Okay, but you told me what your plans were, well, and I told you that I knew, I had a feeling, I suspected. Remember?
You know, I certainly screwed it up, didn't I?
Well, never mind that. But if I suspected, he too suspected. What I'm trying to say. Didn't really focus
Well,
on it.
something I think I left this out, but I'll tell you that I went to his Corona house while I was in Danbury.
I think I read that you did, but I don't remember if you told me.
You read somebody, I mean, I think I told these, you know, the Mike Kennedy types that I was driving around these places, I grew up, my family places. And
Oh, it was in the newspaper then.
yeah, but I really went. And then next time we have a visiting day, I'll go over it with you.
I'd like to hear it, but...
I could have left that out.
Okay, but I just want you to know that, remember what I told you I thought you were going to do? He knew it too. Keep that in mind.
I think that if he was concerned about that, he wouldn't have been treating me so bad.
I disagree.
What?
I don't agree with you. Treating you
Because
so
he
bad.
thought I would screw it up like I did? Maybe he's right. I guess he is right then. If you're right...
Remember that if I knew it, he knew it. That's my point.
Now, the evidence will show that what they're talking about is that Bob Durst was planning on killing his brother. That's what the evidence is going to show. Now, they discussed his plans for his brother in another call about a week later.
From way back when, I was planning on Igoring BM.
Yes, I know.
So that was a big problem getting married. Because I was afraid that what happened to me just now, you know, would happen back then.
Well, can I ask you now that you brought that up? Don't you think he knew how you felt?
I don't think he knew what I, you know, Igor.
Yeah, I think he did because I do. So I think...
Oh, no. He don't know me like that. Maybe now he suspects that maybe or something. I don't know. This is just so... I suspect he doesn't even suspect now.
Evidence is going to show that Igor were the dogs Bob loved that he had to put down. Not abuse them, not kill them, but BM is Douglas, which we demonstrated in the next clip. And Igoring, the evidence will show, is Bob Durst talking about killing his brother. Now, a little later in that same conversation, he makes it clear.
For me to explain or let the jury know what a terrible life I've had, the way to do it is to get BM to testify.
now this is there.
What?
That's like an incredible mistake.
I can't.
Hey,
I could get BM and I could get the other people who watched him being, you know, during those days
right.
and have them all testify.
Now, while waiting trial in Galveston, Bob Durst put together what's known as the BD story. This would form the template for his Galveston trial testimony. Now, the physical evidence from the Galveston crime scene will impeach Durst's version of the killing. The problem is that even Bob Durst, he can't keep track of all the different versions, all the lies that he is told. Durst testified at his trial in 2003 that he had a psychiatric psychological analysis and testing which showed Asperger's syndrome, which is sort of autism. So he basically attempted to blame or to cast responsibility on his actions for a form of autism. The evidence is going to show that that wasn't true. And in fact, Mr. Durst, during the interview in 2015, admits it.
Well, Bob, you agree that was a load of bullshit by the shrink.
Yeah.
Now, at the conclusion of the Galveston trial, Durst was found not guilty. And shortly thereafter, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling in 2005 began research for what would turn out to be their movie, All Good Things. Now, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling are documentary filmmakers. They also, again, they made a movie, All Good Things. They grew up in nearby Scarsdale. They knew about the story. And All Good Things was kind of the fictionalized version of this story, of Bob Durst's life. Now, that movie was released in 2010. On December 11th, 2010, Durst and Jarecki recorded the DVD commentary for All Good Things. Bob Durst had read the script, and even though it portrayed him as responsible for 3 murders, he liked it. So he sat down. Now, immediately after the recording of the DVD commentary, that's when the first of the 3 interviews where he wears the sweater takes place, the same day. Now, there's one thing that Bob Durst made clear, and only one thing that he did not like about that movie. And this is a movie that displays him, portrays him as being responsible for the murder, either himself or the movie had a fictionalized story, and it's fictionalized that the Morris Black character was a hitman and killed Susan Berman at Bob's instructions. No evidence of that. That was a movie. But the movie portrays Mr. Durst being responsible for 3 murders. When he is watching the DVD commentary and it's showing him abusing his wife, you hear nothing. When it's showing him talking about him killing Susan, you hear nothing. But this was something Bob Durst didn't like.
And this made me feel bad about the movie, Andrew. I mean, the thought idea that I could kill Igor, I don't like.
Because the movie displayed and made the inference that Bob Durst had killed his dog, Igor. And Bob Durst did not like that, because unlike the murder of Kathie, the murder of Susan, the murder of Morris Black, it wasn't true. Bob Durst did not harm his dogs. And he didn't like that that's how he was portrayed. Now, during the interviews, Durst admitted how frequently he would talk to himself. And on multiple occasions during the filming, he was literally caught talking to himself on film. His lawyer, who was present for some of the interviews, had to tell him, Bob, they can hear what you're saying. On April 18, 2012, a little over a year and a half later, approximately, less than a year and a half, Durst sat down for the 4th interview. By this time, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling had what we call the Sereb envelope, which Bob Durst did not know they had. Toward the conclusion of the conversation of that interview, and again, you remember that Bob Durst was confronted with the 2 letters. He said, I wrote this one, I did not write that one. We now, of course, know that's a lie. He's admitted he wrote them both. But towards the conclusion, he walks in the bathroom. Now, there's been a lot, and the evidence is going to show that in the Jinx, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling absolutely edited the recordings. And you can think what you want about that, etc., but you're listening to the unedited. And before the door can even close in the bathroom, while Bob Durst is still wearing his mic, just listen, you'll hear the door close. This is what happens.
All right, this is the bathroom. There it is. Your court.
You can hear Bob Durst gets into that bathroom, and before the door even closes, he realizes, uh-oh, there it is, you're caught. Moments later, he's going to say this.
Kill them all. Of course.
On February 8, 2015, the first episode of the 6-episode documentary The Jinx premiered on HBO. The episodes aired every Sunday, and the conclusion was set to air on March 15, 2015. However, on March 8th, the fifth episode of The Jinx, which contained more incriminating evidence against Durst, including Sarah Kaufman's first response was to panic, to try to get a hold of Sarah, and then literally to flee his apartment in Houston for it would turn out in New Orleans. On March 11, 2015, LAPD RHD detectives obtained an arrest warrant for Durst from a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge, charging him with murder. On March 14, 2015, with the aid of the FBI, Durst was located and arrested in a New Orleans hotel registered under a false name. Investigators will ultimately identify and search the hotel room where Durst was staying. Inside the room, they found, among other things, $44,000 in cash, an expensive lifelike latex mask, and a loaded .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, and not loaded with one bullet for a suicide, a fully loaded gun. The next day, on Sunday, March 15, 2015, Durst sat down for an interview with 2 LAPD detectives and myself. Before starting the interview, Durst was given coffee, a blanket, advised of his Miranda rights, told it was voluntary, and he decided to participate in the interview voluntarily. This voluntary interview lasted nearly 3 hours. You're going to hear the whole thing other than what the judge has edited. But you're going to hear that interview. During that interview, Durst made numerous incriminating statements.
I'm gonna lay my cards on the table. I'm here talking to you today because I truly believe, Bob, I don't think you feel that badly about Morris. That's my view. I don't think you feel badly about Morris. I don't know how you feel about Kathie, but here's what I do know. I know that when you killed Susan, that was not something you wanted to do. Do you know how I know that? I mean, are you interested in why I know that?
I'm going to stay away from killing Susan.
Durst doesn't say, I didn't kill Susan. It's not true. How can you even accuse me? He says, I'm going to stay away from that area. The evidence is going to show that that was, in essence, an admission, a confession. Durst was asked, and every once in a while, Bob Durst is very honest. He's asked, hey, if you had killed Kathie or Susan, would you tell me?
I want to, I'm going to just ask this straight out. If you had killed Kathie, would you tell me?
No.
If you had killed Susan, would you tell me?
No.
Durst then made the following
I
shocking.
would like to talk to you when you come back in court today. That's going to be up to you what you do. I don't know whether there'll be a lawyer there today. I don't know what that lawyer is going to tell you.
He's going to tell me to shut my mouth, of course.
And this one I'll tell you, you have every right to listen to your lawyer and to do what your lawyer says. I think you know that you've already told me, you've talked enough. I have enough now. What I want to talk about when we get back is I want to find out what is it that we can discuss where I can get the truth about some of the things that you've said you couldn't really answer for me. But you have told me, correct, that there is, you know what I want, correct?
Yes, you'd like some details from me if I knew
Yes.
about where Kathie's body is.
And about what happened to Susan. Those,
And about what
okay,
happened to Susan.
and you would agree that you're in the position, if you want, to tell me more than you have so far.
About that, I'm not about to go that far.
Okay. Well, but wait a minute, because you're telling me though, then I want to understand when you're saying, tell me what.
Well, you asked me what I thought you wanted to hear. I think what you wanted to hear to make Ann McCormack happy is, what did you do with Kathie?
Right.
And I think you want me to go through details of Susan.
I do.
Okay, so now, what would I ask for?
Tell me.
If I tell you those things, I'm pleading guilty.
Okay.
And I'm pleading guilty, I'm gonna be going back to Los Angeles, to California, and doing my time.
Now, the evidence is going to show that, in essence, that was a second confession. But that's not the only ones that he's had, because Bob Durst also.
It's for the jury to determine. No, I'm going to sustain. I anticipate your objection. Again, that's an argument, ladies and gentlemen. You'll hear that. You'll determine whether or not that is a admission or a confession. Mr. Lewin is allowed to present to you the statements that Mr. Durst made to you, and at the closing, he may argue to you what that means. But now he can tell you what the statements were. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So the evidence will show that this is not the first damaging statement Mr. Durst had given. After numerous interviews, his very close friend, Nick Chavin, who the evidence will show was trying to protect Bob Durst, did not want to speak to us at all, ultimately recounted what happened after the dinner he had with his close friend, Bob Durst, in late 2014.
The dinner concluded, and it was then that as we got up to leave, I realized that we hadn't discussed the two things that he had mentioned, Kathie and Susan. I felt kind of weird that I didn't bring it up. We walked out the door. This is hard. We walked out the door, and on the sidewalk, I said, "You wanted to talk about Susan?" And Bob said, "I had to. It was her or me. I had no choice." And then he turned to walk away, and I said, "You wanted to talk about Kathie?" And he just kept walking away. Nothing more was said.
That's what the evidence is going to show in this case. So now I want to.
3 o'clock, and we can go straight to our reporter. Okay. So we'll take a 15-minute break. Ladies and gentlemen, do not talk about the case or any of the people involved in it. You're excused for 15 minutes.